I never thought my life would turn out this way. You see, I used to be the woman who had it all. A loving husband, two beautiful kids, and a life that others would envy. But in one fateful day, everything changed. It started with a routine doctor's appointment. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a follow-up for some tests I'd been putting off. I was healthy, or so I thought. But the results came back, and my world crashed. Cancer, the word echoed in my head like a thunderclap. I couldn't breathe. I could barely hear the doctor's voice as he explained the treatment options, the prognosis, the next steps. My mind was spinning. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the only thing I could focus on was the fact that my life, as I knew it, was over. I drove home in a daze, the weight of it all pressing on my chest. I couldn't even cry. The tears wouldn't come. It was like I was numb, walking through life with a heavy burden I didn't know how to carry. When I walked into the house, Tom was sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine. His face brightened when he saw me, but I couldn't bring myself to smile back. The diagnosis was still fresh, and I felt like I was choking on the reality of it all. I sat down beside him, my hands trembling as I held the medical papers. He looked at me, a little puzzled. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice casual, as though I hadn't just been handed the most devastating news of my life. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I couldn't hide it anymore. I had to tell him. "Tom," I paused, my throat tight. "The doctor, I have cancer." His expression faltered for just a second before his lips curled into a slight frown. "What kind of cancer?" I told him what the doctor had said, the prognosis, the treatment plan, but his reaction was not what I had expected. He didn't reach for me. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't even seem to understand the magnitude of what I had just shared. "Okay," he muttered. "Well, we'll get through this, right?" That was it. No hug. No, "I'm here for you." Just a cold acknowledgement, as though he was reading a script in his head. But that wasn't the worst of it. Over the next few days, I started to notice something strange about Tom. He was distant. His eyes would dart away when I needed to talk, like he was uncomfortable with me, with the whole situation. At first, I thought maybe I was just imagining it. Maybe I was overreacting, dealing with the shock of my diagnosis in my own way. But no, it was real. He wasn't home as much. When he was, he barely said a word. I'd ask if everything was okay, and he'd brush it off, muttering something about work or the kids. But I could feel it in the air between us, the distance, the wall he was building up around himself. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe he was just processing things the way men sometimes do. But then, one evening, things took a turn I wasn't prepared for. It was a Friday night, and I had just finished my first round of chemotherapy. I was exhausted, drained in ways I never thought possible. I could barely keep my eyes open, but I still managed to make dinner for the family, hopping for a semblance of normalcy. I needed to feel like things were okay, that we were okay. But as I served dinner, I noticed Tom wasn't eating. He sat there, pushing his food around on his plate, not once looking up at me. "Tom," I said, my voice trembling, "is everything all right?" He finally looked at me, but there was no warmth in his gaze, only coldness. "I'm fine," he replied curtly, his voice lacking the tenderness it used to have. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something was wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. My heart sank, and I fought the tears that were threatening to spill over. How could the man I loved, the man I thought I'd spend my life with, be so indifferent to me now? Did he really care about me, or was it all just a facade? That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, the silence in the house suffocating. Was I really imagining it? Had Tom really changed, or was I just too consumed by my own illness to see things clearly? I tried to shake off the thoughts and drift into sleep, but it was no use. My mind kept racing, playing over every interaction, every glance, every silence. And then, just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard Tom's voice from the living room. "You know what? I can't do this anymore," he said, loud enough for me to hear through the bedroom door. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. What was he talking about? I crept to the door, pressing my ear to the wood, straining to hear his words. "I didn't sign up for this," he muttered. "I didn't sign up for cancer. This isn't what I wanted. This isn't the life I imagined. I can't do this. I can't carry the weight of it. And then I heard it, the thing that would shatter everything I thought I knew. "You need to leave," he said. His voice was calm, too calm. "I can't handle this. You need to find somewhere else to stay." My breath caught in my throat, and my legs gave way beneath me. I sank to the floor, the world spinning around me. My husband, my partner, the father of my children, had just told me to leave because of my illness. I couldn't believe it. My mind couldn't comprehend what was happening. I stayed frozen on the floor for what felt like hours, the pain in my chest unbearable. It was one thing to be told you have cancer. It was another to be abandoned by the person you loved most in the world, the person you trusted to stand by you through thick and thin. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, tears silently streaming down my face. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. The one person I thought I could rely on had turned his back on me when I needed him the most. The next morning, Tom was gone. He hadn't even said goodbye. He didn't come home until late that night, and when he did, I couldn't bring myself to speak to him. What could I say? What was there left to say? And so, just like that, my perfect life had been ripped apart. My husband, the man I thought I would grow old with, had kicked me out, leaving me to face cancer and the world alone. But I wasn't going to let him break me, not this time. If you think I should just walk away and move on from this pain, well, you couldn't be more wrong. I'm stronger than that. And Tom, he'll regret this more than he'll ever know. Because this isn't the end of the story, it's just the beginning. The world around me seemed to freeze as Tom's words replayed in my head, over and over again. "You need to leave." The sting of his cold, heartless command reverberated through my entire being. I had always been the kind of person who held on to hope, who believed that love could conquer all. But now, all I had left was a bitter taste in my mouth and the feeling of being completely, utterly alone. I could hear the clock ticking in the silence of the house. Tom was gone, and I was left there, in the house we once shared, feeling more like a stranger than a wife. The kids were staying with my sister for the weekend, which I guess was a blessing in disguise. I couldn't imagine explaining to them what had just happened, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending either. I packed my things, just a few clothes, nothing too heavy. There was no use in dragging this out. What was I supposed to take anyway? The house, the life we'd built together. Tom had just thrown it all away, and now it was up to me to pick up the pieces of what was left of my dignity. My hands were shaking as I zipped up the suitcase. The weight of the moment hung over me. I had to leave. I had to get out of this place. I looked around one last time, seeing the remnants of the life I had shared with him. The photographs on the walls, the wedding pictures, the family portraits of us smiling, so carefree, so in love. But none of that mattered anymore. The man I thought would always be by my side had turned his back on me. He hadn't even flinched when he told me to leave, as if I were some stranger he could just discard. I had to go, but where? Where could I go? I couldn't return to my mother's house, and I didn't want to put my sister in the position of having to take care of me. I needed to figure this out on my own. I just needed space to breathe and process everything that had happened. I made my way to the car, and it felt like every step I took was weighed down by the grief I was carrying. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, not sure where I was heading or what I was even doing. The road seemed endless, and my thoughts were a blur. Eventually, I found myself at a small diner on the outskirts of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was quiet, perfect for someone who wanted to disappear. I walked inside and sat down in a booth near the window, looking out at the world that was moving on without me. The waitress came over, a kind woman in her 40s with soft eyes. She smiled gently at me as she set down a glass of water. "Everything okay, hun?" she asked, her voice soft, like she could tell something was wrong. I couldn't bring myself to lie. "No," I said, my voice cracking. "Everything's far from okay." She nodded sympathetically, but she didn't press further. I appreciated that. Sometimes, the last thing you need is someone pushing for more details. She just left me alone, and that was all I needed. Hours passed. I ate something, though I wasn't really hungry. My thoughts kept returning to Tom and the way he had treated me. I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I was never enough for him. Had I failed him? Had I failed our family? The waiter refilled my water glass, and I gave him a weak smile. You know, I used to think people like me would always be strong. I never thought something like this could happen to me, I said, more to myself than to anyone in particular. He raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I looked up at him, meeting his gaze for the first time. I guess I thought love would fix everything. I thought that, no matter what happened, we'd be able to get through it. But I was wrong. My voice broke again, and I couldn't stop it. The waiter seemed to understand something in that moment, but he didn't say anything. He just gave me a quiet nod and walked away. It wasn't until the sun was setting that I made the decision to leave the diner and start walking. I couldn't stay there forever, as comforting as it was to be away from the suffocating silence of my home. I had to move forward. I had to pick up the pieces of my broken life and try to make sense of it all. I walked to the bus station and bought a one-way ticket. I wasn't sure where I was going, but it didn't matter. I just needed to go somewhere far from here, somewhere I could breathe without constantly hearing Tom's words echoing in my head. You need to leave. As the bus pulled away, I couldn't help but think back to that night, when Tom had abandoned me without a second thought. How had it all come to this? How had we gone from being so in love to this, me, alone on a bus, and him, out there living his life without a care in the world? The tears came again, but this time they were different. They weren't just for the pain Tom had caused me. They were for the woman I used to be, the one who believed in love, who trusted so easily. That woman was gone now, and I was left to figure out how to survive without her. Days turned into weeks. I found a small apartment in a quiet part of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I didn't have much, but I had my health, or what was left of it, and that was enough for me. I started looking for work, doing whatever I could to make ends meet, but inside I was still struggling. Every day I woke up with the same feeling of loneliness, the same gnawing emptiness in my chest. And then, one day, I ran into Tom. It wasn't by chance. I knew exactly where he'd be. I had been following him, tracking his every move. I wasn't stalking him, I was just keeping an eye on him. He was at the grocery store, of all places, pushing a cart down the aisle, looking exactly the same as he had before. But now, something was different. There was a distance in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked lost. As I stood there, hidden between the aisles, watching him, a surge of rage rose in my chest. I should have felt pity, I thought. After all, wasn't he the one who had cast me aside? But no, I didn't feel pity. I felt a fire burning deep inside me, a fire that told me I would make him pay. Not in a violent way, but in a way that would leave him broken, humiliated, and wondering how the woman he had thrown away could have become stronger than ever before. I turned away and walked out of the store, but my mind was made up. I wasn't done with Tom, not by a long shot. As I walked away, I could feel the old, familiar sense of determination coming back. I would make him regret what he had done to me. I would make him see that I was more than just a woman he could abandon. I was a force to be reckoned with, and he had no idea what was coming. If you're on this journey with me, make sure to subscribe so you can follow along. Trust me, what happens next will blow your mind. If you're wondering what I'll do next, stay tuned because this is just the beginning. And don't forget to comment, what would you do if you were in my shoes? It's funny how life can change so fast, like a storm ripping through a calm sky. One moment, you think you have everything under control, and the next, everything's in pieces. I was learning that the hard way. But what's even stranger is how quickly things go from bad to worse for the person who once betrayed you. I had spent weeks moving on, or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. I had found a small apartment in a quiet part of town, far from the memories of my old life. I worked, I tried to stay busy, and I kept pushing forward, doing my best to heal from the wounds Tom had left. But deep down, the anger never really left me. It simmered beneath the surface, just waiting for the right moment to boil over. The days passed, but every time I thought of Tom, I couldn't help but wonder, was he even thinking about me? Did he regret what he did? Was he out there living his perfect life, completely unfazed by the damage he had caused? I knew I needed closure. I needed to understand if he was still the same man, or if he was feeling the weight of what he'd done. One morning, as I was sipping coffee in my tiny apartment, I got a call. The number was unfamiliar, but something told me I needed to answer. I picked up the phone. "Hello," I said, my voice unsure. "Jessica." The voice on the other end was deep, gruff, definitely not Tom. "Yes, this is Jessica," I replied, my heart beginning to race. "Who is this?" "It's Derek," the man said. "Tom's brother." I froze. Tom had a brother. I hadn't heard anything about him in years. I barely knew anything about Tom's family outside of the basics, but Derek's voice sounded urgent. And I could sense there was something important coming. "Listen, I don't know how to say this, but Tom needs help," Derek continued, his tone low. "He's a mess. He's been spiraling ever since. Well, you know." I gripped the phone tighter, my heart pounding. "What do you mean? What's going on?" Derek sighed. "I know you probably don't care, but Tom's been shutting everyone out. He won't talk to anyone, and he keeps pushing people away. He's been drinking a lot, getting into arguments, and he can't even keep a job anymore. It's like he's lost. He's fallen apart, Jessica." I sat back, stunned. I hadn't expected this. Tom, my Tom, the man who had been so cold to me just a few weeks ago, the man who had told me to leave, was falling apart. Was this the same man who had kicked me out of our home, who had turned his back on me? The one who had refused to be there for me when I needed him the most? I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, like I had been right all along. The other part of me, well, it hurt. It hurt because, despite everything he had done, I still cared for him. I wasn't sure if that made me weak or if it was just a part of me I couldn't shake. "I'm not asking you to help him, Jessica." Derek's voice pulled me back to the present. "But I think you should know. He's not the same guy you married, and he's regretting how things went down between you two." The words hung in the air like poison. Tom regretted it. Regretted what? Tossing me aside when I needed him most. How could he have possibly thought I would just sit there and wait for him to come to his senses? No, that wasn't the way this worked. I had learned to survive without him, to rebuild my life from the ground up. I wasn't the broken woman he had left behind anymore. I was stronger now. And if Tom wanted to regret anything, he could do it from afar. "Why are you telling me this, Derek?" I finally asked, my voice quiet but firm. "I think you deserve to know the truth," he said. "Maybe it won't change anything, but I think maybe Tom needs to apologize, and maybe you need to see that he's not the same man who kicked you out. He's lost, Jessica. And if you ever wanted to make him regret what he did, now might be the time." The phone call ended, and I was left sitting in silence, trying to process what had just happened. Tom was unraveling. My betrayal had left him broken, and now a part of me felt like I was the one left to pick up the pieces. But as much as I wanted to feel sorry for him, I couldn't. He had shown me no mercy, no empathy, and now I was supposed to feel pity for him. That was a feeling I wasn't ready to embrace. As the days went on, I couldn't shake the thoughts of Tom. The man I had loved for so many years was slipping through my fingers, and all I could do was watch. He was still out there, and part of me wanted to reach out. But why? Why should I? He had made his choice, and I had made mine. I started to notice little things. Tom's absence in the places we used to frequent, the silence of not seeing his car in the driveway when I drove by our old house. I didn't have any desire to go back there, but it felt surreal, like the man who once promised to love me forever had disappeared into thin air. One evening, after a particularly rough day of work, I decided to drive by our old house. I didn't know why. I guess it was more of an impulse than anything else. I parked a few blocks away, just watching. The house looked the same, but everything felt different. It wasn't my home anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. But then I saw him, Tom. He was standing in the front yard, looking lost, his shoulders hunched as if the weight of the world was on his back. He wasn't the same man I had known. The man who had been confident, assured, so sure of himself. He was gone. Instead, I saw a man broken by his own choices, standing there in the place where our family had once lived. The pain I had been pushing down hit me all at once. I didn't know what to feel: anger, sadness, pity. All of it swirled together, and I wanted to run to him, to scream, to tell him everything I had been holding in. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I watched him, and as I did, I realized something I hadn't fully acknowledged until now. Tom had made his decision. He had abandoned me without looking back, and now he was reaping the consequences of his own actions. His guilt, his regret, it wasn't mine to bear. I had suffered enough. It was time for me to let go, to finally put the past behind me and embrace the future. And the future didn't include him. But as I turned the car around and drove away, a small, twisted part of me couldn't help but feel a little satisfaction. Tom was paying the price for his own selfishness. And though I didn't wish him harm, I knew that he would never forget the woman he had cast aside. I didn't need to feel pity for him. He had made his choice. Now it was my turn to make mine. If you're still with me, don't forget to hit subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. What happens between me and Tom will shock you, and trust me, you don't want to miss the next chapter of this crazy journey. Leave a comment. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Would you feel sorry for Tom, or would you do what I'm doing? Let me know. I thought I was done with him. I had told myself over and over that I was better off without Tom, that he didn't deserve me, that he didn't deserve a second chance. But there was something about seeing him like that, broken and lost, that gnawed at me. It shouldn't have affected me the way it did, but it did, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't just angry at what he had done to me. I was angry at what he had taken from me. I had built my entire life around him, around the idea of us, around the belief that we were a team. But now, here I was alone, on my own, with nothing but memories and a broken heart. He had taken everything from me, and for the longest time I let him, but not anymore. The problem was, I was still tangled up in the wreckage of our past, unable to completely shake off the image of him standing in front of our old house, looking so lost. Part of me wanted to reach out, wanted to run back to him and fix everything, but the other part of me, stronger, fiercer, the part that had come alive in the wake of his betrayal, refused to allow myself to fall back into that trap. It was time for a change. It was time for me to take back control, and that's exactly what I started doing. I spent the next few weeks focusing on myself, on my health, on my emotional state, on building a life that didn't revolve around Tom. I knew I had to. I was no longer the woman who had waited for him to love her back. I was no longer the woman who allowed him to hold all the power. If anything, it was now about me taking back my life. No more excuses. I started going to therapy, meeting with a counselor who helped me process everything that had happened. I still cried a lot. I still had moments where I wondered if I had done something wrong, if there was something I could have done to make him stay. But in those moments of weakness, I reminded myself of who I was now. I wasn't that woman anymore. I was stronger. I was more than just a wife or a mother. I was me. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into it, pouring my energy into projects and deadlines. It wasn't much, but it gave me purpose. It gave me a sense of normalcy in a world that had felt so upside down for far too long. But as much as I tried to bury myself in work, my thoughts kept drifting back to Tom. His face haunted me. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering where he was, what he was doing. I knew he had no right to occupy my thoughts, but I couldn't help it. I had given him everything, my love, my trust, my heart, and he had discarded it all so easily. I couldn't just let that go without it leaving some kind of mark on me. And then one day, as I was walking home from work, I saw him again. Tom, standing outside a bar, leaning against a post, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't see me at first, but I saw him. And I could feel the anger rise up in me again, like a tide threatening to pull me under. This time I didn't freeze. I didn't stand there, paralyzed by the past. No, this time I walked straight up to him, my steps firm, my heart pounding with purpose. I could feel the familiar rush of adrenaline as I approached him, the familiar desire to confront him and make him see what he had done to me. He looked up just as I reached him, his eyes widening in surprise. "Jessica," he said, his voice barely a whisper, as if he couldn't believe I was standing there in front of him. I didn't respond right away. I just stood there, staring at him, taking in the disheveled, worn-out version of the man I had once known. He looked broken. "Tom," I said, finally speaking, my voice steady despite the emotions raging inside me. What do you want? What do you think you can do now?" He swallowed hard, his gaze flicking down to the ground, unable to meet my eyes. He paused, then looked up at me, guilt written all over his face. "I'm sorry, Jessica. I don't know what came over me. I was wrong. I hurt you. I made a mistake. And now I don't know how to fix it." Fix it, fix it. After everything he had done. How could he even think that a simple apology would be enough? How could he think that after throwing me out, abandoning me when I was at my most vulnerable, I could ever trust him again? I took a deep breath, trying to calm the fire inside me. This wasn't about anger anymore. This was about me, about reclaiming my dignity, my strength, and my sense of self. "Tom," I said, my voice softer now but still carrying the weight of everything I had been through. "You had your chance. You made your choice, and I've made mine." His face fell, and for a moment I saw a flicker of desperation in his eyes. "Please, Jessica, don't shut me out. I need you. I know I don't deserve it, but I need you back. I've changed. I swear I have." I could feel the tears threatening to well up, but I held them back. This wasn't about me feeling sorry for him. This was about me standing my ground, about me not falling for his manipulations again. "No, Tom," I said firmly. "You don't get to come back into my life after what you did. You don't get to break me and then expect me to forgive you just because you feel bad now." He opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off. "And don't even try to tell me you're sorry," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "Because I'm past that. You made your bed, and now you have to lie in it. But don't think for a second that I'm going to be the one lying next to you." His eyes welled with tears, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. But then I remembered everything. The betrayal, the loneliness, the pain. No, I wasn't going to let myself fall back into that. Not anymore. I turned and walked away, not looking back. I could feel Tom's gaze on my back, but I didn't care. I had taken control of my life, and now it was time for me to take control of what came next. As I walked away from him, something inside me shifted. I wasn't the woman who had been abandoned anymore. I wasn't the woman who had been left to pick up the pieces of her broken heart. No, I was someone else now, someone stronger. Someone who would no longer be pushed around, who would no longer let anyone take advantage of her. Tom had made a huge mistake, but that mistake was his to live with. I was done being his victim. I was done being the one left behind. Now it was time for my plan to unfold. And when I was done with Tom, he'd wish he'd never crossed me, because I wasn't going to stop until he saw the full weight of the mistake he'd made. The days after I confronted Tom felt like a haze, a whirlwind of emotions that I couldn't quite process. I had stood there, my feet firmly planted, telling him everything I had been holding back for months. It was cathartic in a way I didn't expect. For once, I didn't feel powerless. For once, I didn't feel small. But I knew, deep down, this wasn't over. The confrontation was just a small piece of the puzzle. Tom might have been begging me to come back, but I wasn't interested in his apologies. No, this wasn't about forgiveness anymore. This was about something else, a chance for me to finally take control and make him realize exactly what he had lost. And that was the only thing that kept me going. I kept my distance from him. No more texts. No more calls, no more apologies. I had told him everything I needed to say. He had to feel the loss, he had to feel the regret of pushing me out of his life. But it wasn't just about making him regret it. It was about me becoming someone he would never forget. Someone stronger, someone who had been hurt but was now healing, rebuilding, and reclaiming her power. It was in the days that followed that I began to plot. It wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. No, I wasn't going to burn his house down or sabotage his life in some dramatic fashion. My revenge was going to be subtler, more powerful. It was going to come in the form of my transformation. I began by focusing on myself. I took better care of my body, exercising more, eating right, and giving myself the love I had been withholding. My health, while still fragile, was improving with every passing day. I enrolled in therapy, attended support groups, and surrounded myself with people who lifted me up. I had people who believed in me, who didn't see me as the broken woman Tom had left behind. Work, too, became my anchor. It wasn't just a way to distract myself, it was where I felt like I had a purpose again. Slowly, I climbed the ranks, taking on projects I never thought I would be capable of. I thrived in the professional world, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of something. But despite all the progress I was making, despite how far I had come, a part of me couldn't shake the thought of Tom. I knew what he was doing now. I had kept tabs on him through his friends, through social media. I wasn't stalking him, I was just watching. It wasn't healthy, but I had to know what was happening in his life. And what I saw, what I discovered, was exactly what I wanted. Tom was unraveling. And the more I watched, the more I saw him slip further and further from the man he used to be. I knew that wasn't my fault. He had made those choices. He had burned the bridge between us. But somehow, deep inside, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. For once, he was the one left with the mess to clean up. For once, I was not the one picking up the pieces. It was during this period of healing and transformation that I met someone new. His name was Michael. He was kind, attentive, and patient, a man who didn't rush things, who didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He was everything Tom wasn't. He listened when I spoke. He showed up when he said he would. And best of all, he made me feel like I mattered. He made me feel like I was worth something again. But as much as I tried to focus on Michael, a part of me couldn't let go of what Tom had done to me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was past that, but the scar was still there. And as much as I tried to move on, I couldn't fully close the door on Tom. Not yet. Not until I had made him see the damage he had caused. I wasn't going to let him back into my life, but I wasn't done making him understand. I spent weeks planning, quietly, carefully, without anyone knowing. I began to rebuild myself in ways Tom could never have imagined. I started dressing better, styling my hair differently, making subtle changes to the way I carried myself. It wasn't about trying to impress anyone. It was about proving to myself that I was worth more than the version of me he had discarded. The more I changed, the more I felt like a new person. It wasn't about becoming someone else. It was about becoming who I was always meant to be. And with every change, I felt a sense of power surge within me. The power that had been stripped from me for so long was finally mine again. Then, one night, as I was walking home from work, I ran into him again. Tom. It wasn't like the last time. This time, I was different. I was stronger, more confident, and less emotional. I was no longer that woman who had clung to the idea of a perfect marriage. He saw me first, his eyes widening as if he hadn't expected to see me at all. For a moment, I saw the old Tom, the man I had fallen in love with, the man who had once smiled at me with love in his eyes. But that moment passed quickly, replaced by the uncertainty that now defined him. "Jessica," he said, his voice low and hesitant, "I didn't expect to run into you." I looked him in the eye, and for the first time I wasn't scared. I wasn't angry. I was just indifferent. "Funny," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I didn't expect to see you either." Tom's face softened, and for a second I thought he might reach out to me. But I didn't move. I stood there, unwavering, waiting for him to speak. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "About what I did, and I'm sorry. I've made so many mistakes, Jessica. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I regret it. I regret everything." I heard his words, but they didn't move me. They didn't have the same weight they would have had months ago. He didn't get to fix this with an apology. He didn't get to erase the pain he had caused. "I'm glad you're finally seeing the truth," I said quietly, my gaze steady. "But it doesn't matter anymore. You made your choice, Tom, and I've made mine." He looked at me, his expression vulnerable, like he was waiting for me to change my mind, to come back to him. But I didn't. "I'm not here to punish you, Tom," I said, my voice softer now, but still firm. "I'm not here to make you feel worse than you already do, but I won't let you back into my life. I've learned how to stand on my own. I've learned how to rebuild, and now I'm doing it for me." Tom looked like he wanted to say something, but the words never came. He just stood there, silent, defeated. He could see it now. He could see that I wasn't the woman he had abandoned. I was someone else, someone stronger, someone who had taken control of her own life. And as I turned to walk away, I knew that Tom would never forget this moment. He would never forget the woman he had discarded, the woman who had rebuilt herself from the ashes, stronger than before. If you think things are getting interesting now, trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. Stay tuned for what's to come, because this story is about to take a wild turn. Subscribe and follow along as we unravel what happens next. And leave a comment. What do you think is going to happen next? Would you do things the same way, or would you take a different approach? Let me know. The silence in the room was deafening. It had been days since I last saw Tom, and in that time everything had changed. My life, my mindset, my perspective on everything I once thought I knew, Tom's betrayal had shattered all of it. But now, with everything I had worked for, everything I had rebuilt inside of me, I was ready. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving, growing stronger by the day. And soon, Tom would see that he had no idea who I was anymore. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my power, my dignity, my freedom. I had let him go once back when I was desperate, clinging to the hope that he might come back and everything could somehow return to normal. But normal was never coming back. I realized that now. What I wanted, what I needed, was far more than just a return to the past. What I needed was closure. What I needed was a taste of justice that only I could give myself. I wasn't the same person I had been. The woman who had begged for his forgiveness, the woman who had cried herself to sleep night after night, she was gone. She had been replaced by someone who wasn't afraid to go after what she wanted. Someone who had learned how to survive and even thrive without him. And that's when it hit me. The plan, the perfect plan. It wasn't going to be immediate. It wasn't going to be reckless. No, this was going to be calculated, strategic, and most of all, it was going to hurt him in a way he could never expect. I began by tracking his movements, just as I had before. This time, however, I wasn't doing it out of curiosity. I wasn't doing it because I missed him. I was doing it because I needed to know when the time was right. And when the time was right, I would strike. I kept tabs on his social media. It wasn't hard. Tom had never been the most private person. He posted pictures of his life, his friends, his every move. It made it easier for me to figure out what he was doing, who he was with, and, most importantly, when he was vulnerable. As the weeks passed, I kept watching him. He wasn't doing well. His life had spiraled further out of control. He had started drinking heavily again, something I knew he did to cope with stress. The once proud man who had been so driven, so sure of himself, was now a shadow of his former self. He had nothing left to hold on to. His career was a mess. He couldn't keep a job, bouncing from one failed attempt to the next. His friends had distanced themselves, and it seemed like the only people he could count on were the ones enabling his destructive behavior. He'd lost everything, and he was still too proud to admit it. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of watching me break. I wasn't going to let him see how much he hurt me. Instead, I began to work in the shadows, gathering my strength, honing my skills, and preparing for the day I would confront him once more. And when that moment came, it would be on my terms. The first part of my plan was simple. I needed him to believe he still had control. He had always been the type to think he could fix things by using charm or by offering half-hearted apologies. But now, I would use that against him. I set up a meeting, a casual one at first, nothing too obvious, nothing that would give him a reason to suspect anything. I called him after a few weeks of silence just to catch up. I didn't want to seem eager, and I certainly didn't want to seem desperate. "Hey, Tom," I said when he picked up the phone. My voice was steady, controlled. "I was thinking we should meet up and talk, just to catch up. No hard feelings." I heard him pause on the other end. There was silence, then a low laugh. "You want to meet up, after everything that happened?" "Yes," I said, the word falling from my lips without hesitation. "I think it's time." A part of me expected him to back out, to make an excuse, to pretend he wasn't still reeling from the emotional mess he had created. But he didn't. Instead, he agreed. He was too desperate for any semblance of normalcy, too eager to fix things between us. He thought it was a chance to smooth things over, to win back my trust. But what he didn't realize was that I had no intention of giving him that. The day of the meeting arrived, and I showed up early. I chose a quiet cafe near his favorite park, somewhere that held a lot of memories for us, back when things were still good. It was a deliberate choice. I wanted him to feel the weight of the memories. I wanted him to feel the irony of it all. When he arrived, I could see the hesitation in his eyes. He was nervous, which was exactly what I wanted. He had no idea what was coming. "Jessica," he said as he sat down, his eyes scanning my face as if trying to read me. "It's good to see you. I'm really glad you agreed to meet." I didn't smile. I didn't give him any sign of what I was feeling. I just sat there calmly, waiting for him to speak. "I've been thinking about you a lot," he continued, his voice soft, almost pleading. "About what happened. I know I messed up. I don't know what else to say, but I'm sorry, Jessica. I really am. I didn't mean for things to end this way." He looked at me, his eyes searching, expecting me to cave in to forgive him just like that. But I wasn't ready to let him off the hook. Not yet. "You know," I said slowly, leaning forward just slightly, "I've been doing a lot of thinking too, about everything." He nodded eagerly, obviously relieved. "I know I hurt you. I know I've lost your trust, but I want to fix things. I need to fix things." For a moment, I let the silence linger. I watched him squirm a little under the weight of his own words. He had no idea how deep he had dug this hole for himself. "You can't fix this, Tom," I said quietly, my voice unwavering. "You had your chance and you threw it away." His face fell. He opened his mouth to protest, but I wasn't finished. "I've moved on," I continued, my gaze locked onto his. "I'm not the same person I was when you kicked me out. I'm stronger now. And you're just a shadow of the man you used to be." His eyes widened, the sting of my words hitting him harder than I expected. But this was only the beginning. This was just the first strike. "Tom," I said, my voice lowering, "I've been planning this. I've been planning my life without you. And I think you're finally starting to see that." He didn't say anything. He just sat there, looking at me with a mixture of regret and disbelief. The truth was, I had made my peace with him, but I needed him to feel this. I needed him to understand how completely and utterly he had lost me. I needed him to feel the weight of his own mistakes. And as I stood up to leave, I knew that Tom was no longer the man who held any power over me. The payback had begun, and it would be slow, calculated, and painful. But it would be worth it, because in the end, I was the one who had won. And that, more than anything, was the sweetest revenge of all. It had been months since I last saw Tom, but the feeling of betrayal still clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. I'd done what I needed to do to rebuild my life, to take back the pieces of me that he'd discarded without a second thought. But there was one thing left, one final piece of unfinished business I had to attend to. And today, that piece was about to fall into place. I had carefully orchestrated every part of this moment. It wasn't about revenge in the violent, dramatic way most people might expect. No, this was about making Tom understand, truly understand, the depth of his actions. It wasn't about humiliating him for the sake of it. It was about showing him what he had lost and how far I had come. When I first left him, I was broken. I was scared. I didn't know how I'd survive without him, without the life we'd built together. But now, as I stood at the edge of this moment, I knew one thing. I was stronger than I had ever been. He had underestimated me. He thought he could throw me away and watch me crumble. But the truth was, I was never going to let him have that power over me. Not anymore. I walked down the familiar street, the same one where Tom and I had spent countless evenings walking hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing. It was surreal, in a way, to be walking here again. But this time, I wasn't walking with him. This time, I was walking alone, in control of my own destiny. The cafe we used to go to was just ahead, and I could see him through the window. Tom. It had been a while since I'd seen him in person, and I could see how much he'd changed. He was thinner now, the sharpness in his face a reflection of his internal struggle. His hair, once neatly kept, now looked like it hadn't seen a brush in days. He was sitting at a table, nursing a drink, his eyes fixed on the empty space in front of him. It was hard to ignore the pang of emotion I felt looking at him. The same man who had once been my everything. The same man who had promised to stand by me no matter what. The same man who had, just a few months ago, tossed me aside like I was nothing. I stood outside for a moment, gathering my thoughts. I had to do this. I couldn't leave things unfinished, not after everything. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The sound of the bell above the door jingled as I made my way to the table where Tom sat. He looked up, his face frozen in shock when he saw me standing there. His eyes widened, and for a split second, I could see the mix of emotions cross his face: surprise, disbelief, maybe even a little fear. "Jessica," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "what are you doing here?" I didn't sit down. I stood, letting the space between us be a reminder of everything that had passed. I needed him to feel the weight of that distance. "I think it's time we talk," I said, my voice steady, calm. It was hard to believe this was happening, but I wasn't backing down now. "About everything." Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Look, Jessica, I know I've messed up. I know I've hurt you. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I was just scared. I didn't know how to handle it." Scared? Was he really telling me that he had been scared? I had been the one who had been scared. Scared for my life. Scared for my future. Scared because the man I thought I could rely on had thrown me away without a second thought. And now, he was sitting here, telling me he was scared. "Scared," I repeated, my voice tight. "You were scared, and so you decided to kick me out, to leave me alone to fight for my life, Tom. You abandoned me when I needed you the most. And now you're sitting here telling me you were scared. Well, I've been scared too, Tom. I've been scared of losing myself. I've been scared of never being enough. But look at me now. Look at where I am. I've made it through without you, and I'm stronger because of it." His eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe, or guilt. But I wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. Not anymore. "Do you know how many nights I spent thinking about what I could have done differently?" I continued, my voice soft but cutting. "Wondering if I had somehow made a mistake, if maybe it was my fault you left. But I've realized something, Tom. It wasn't me. It was never me. It was you. You were the one who chose to walk away. And now I'm here better than I've ever been, and you're still stuck in the same place." He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand, silencing him. I wasn't finished. "You want to know what my real revenge is?" I asked, my voice cold. "It's not about humiliating you or making you feel what I felt. No, Tom, my revenge is me. I've rebuilt myself. I've become the woman I was always meant to be. And you're just a reminder of how far I've come. You're nothing more than a ghost of the past." Tom's face twisted with something that almost looked like pain. He looked down at his hands, as if he couldn't bear to look at me anymore. "I didn't want to lose you, Jessica," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong." I sighed, stepping back slightly. "I know you were wrong, but your apology doesn't fix anything. Your apology doesn't change the fact that you broke me. And now I'm stronger than I ever was when I was with you. I don't need you, and I certainly don't need your pity." There was a long pause. Tom sat there, staring at the table, and for a moment I thought he might actually cry. But I didn't care about his tears anymore. What I cared about was how far I had come, how much I had fought to get here. I took a deep breath and stood tall. I wasn't about to let him see the tears I had cried for him, the nights I had spent wondering if he'd come back, if he'd change. Those days were behind me. "I came here today to show you something, Tom," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I came here to show you that I'm not the woman you left behind. I'm someone else now. And this is the last time I'm going to waste my time on you. You're not worth it. Not anymore." He didn't respond. He just sat there, staring at the table in front of him. And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't need his approval, his apology, or his forgiveness. I had forgiven myself long ago, and now it was time for me to move on. I turned to leave, but before I could walk out the door, I heard his voice one last time. "Jessica," he called, his voice cracking. "I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for things to end this way." But I didn't turn around. I didn't need to hear it anymore. I walked out of that cafe, feeling lighter than I had in months. I didn't need him to validate me. I didn't need him to fix anything. I had done that on my own. Tom could regret his actions for the rest of his life, but I was done. And in the end, that was the sweetest revenge of all. You've followed me through this journey, and I want to know, what do you think? Was I too harsh on Tom? Did I do the right thing by walking away? Leave your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more. Trust me, this isn't the end of the story, there's more to come.